Are you clear on access to single-sex spaces? Now, the legal ruling which came last Wednesday, a week ago, brought to an end a move championed by former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon in 2018 and passed by the Scottish Parliament in 2022 to make it easier to attain a gender recognition certificate. Current First Minister John Swinney has confirmed that there are no plans to revive that legislation and that his government accepts the Supreme Court ruling that the legal definition of a woman is determined by biological sex. Jane in Glasgow. Morning, Jane. How are you feeling?
Yeah, well, I'm feeling relieved that we have a clarity from the Supreme Court that the understanding and definition of woman is as the vast majority of the public has always known it to be, which is that we have men and women and it's based on biological sex. And that is a relief. I was listening to the concerns there about lesbian women, for example, going into toilets and being searched. And interestingly, the lesbian women I know are doing nothing other than expressing absolute joy and delight that they have now reclaimed the right to lesbian-only spaces that are decidedly female-only, that we can move away from this notion that males can define themselves as a female and ergo define themselves as lesbians and access lesbian-only spaces. So I think there's a lot of relief in
were you surprised
about that?
Given that your friends in the lesbian community are rejoicing, were you surprised to hear Horse, as a lesbian, say that she is unsettled and that she has gone into a public bathroom and she now feels uncomfortable to think that people might be looking at her because she doesn't present, and we're using this expression girly girl, and I apologise if that offends anyone, but because she doesn't present in that way, that they're going to start wondering, well, should you be in here? Are you actually a trans woman? Should I be calling somebody to ask if you can provide some proof?
No, I'm not at all surprised at that.
Is that a good thing?
Concern. Of course it's not a good thing. And I would come back to one of the questions that you raised when you were, looking for contributions to the show this morning. And one of the things you raised was about how do we think politicians have handled this situation? Yep. Have they handled it well? And I think what Horse was saying is really a prime example of how completely, badly, atrociously our politicians on both sides of the border, both at Holyrood and at Westminster, have handled this and continue to handle it. And the example of Maggie Chapman this last week is, to me, is extremely worrying. We have politicians with a responsibility to respect the law, uphold the rights of all individuals within society, and then when we have politicians publicly making really irresponsible and unprofessional, I would argue, statements that are doing nothing but
it's what she thinks. It's what she thinks.
It may well be what she thinks, but as a politician, Kay, she has a responsibility to uphold an ethical code. And accusing the highest court in the land of promulgating bigotry and hatred and transphobia, I would argue as very strong evidence of not adhering to that code.
But you're saying our politicians haven't handled it well. I mean, this goes back a long time, doesn't it? We have been wrestling with this for a long time. I mean, if you were going to look at our politicians, and as you say, in your view, north and south of the border, what do you feel that they have particularly got wrong?
Well, I think one of the things they've got wrong is who they've listened to and who they haven't listened to. And we've had maybe the beginnings of a move forward with that this week. I'm part of the Women's Rights Network in Scotland, and we were given for the first time an opportunity to meet with the Cabinet Secretary. So we had a very brief, 15 minutes, so it's not a great deal of time to discuss anything in depth, but at least we were provided with an opportunity to meet with Shirley Ann Somerville prior to her making her statement in Holyrood yesterday afternoon. And one of the things that we were able to point out really was the concern that groups representing women's rights and concerned about the safety and protection of women and children have not been listened to. They have not had a place at the table where government-funded lobby groups that have very actively promoting the trans rights agenda have been there at every step of the way. And one of the things that when Maggie Chapman was arguing that the Supreme Court hasn't heard from trans people, the Scottish Government and Amnesty International were presenting that view at the Supreme Court. So it's complete nonsense to say that the other view hasn't been heard.
Jane, can I just ask you, and I'm sorry to rush you, it's just we're really, really busy with people who want to get in touch this morning, but do you, and do stay with us, but do you think that as a result of this Supreme Court ruling that women and girls are safer now than they previously were?
Well, they will be if the government actually changes its, and I'll talk specifically about the Scottish Government, because the guidance that we've had from the Scottish Government covering all aspects of life in Scotland, from prisons, the police, schools, the care services, everywhere, health. Look at the Sandy Peggy case in prime example of that, where the guidance has not reflected an accurate interpretation of the law and has enabled employers and public bodies to institute policy and practice that is not consistent with the Supreme Court judgment.
So you would want to see
to be changed.
Yeah, you would want to see guidance that very specifically said that the legal definition of a woman is determined by biological sex, and you believe that would make women and girls safer. We've got Alice Jackson, who is a feminist and a violence against women and girls campaigner. Good morning, Alice.
Good morning, Kay. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Do you believe that this Supreme Court ruling, and if the guidance was to be changed as Jane would like it to be very sort of specific, would make women and girls safer?
Unfortunately not. I was very, very disappointed by the ruling from the Supreme Court last week. And I think there's a little bit of clarity that I want to make, which is that the people who have campaigned for this, they purport to be women's rights groups, that they are speaking on behalf of all women. And as someone who works for women's rights, who works against violence against women and girls, they don't speak for me. They speak for a small group who have made it their mission over the last 10 years, last 15 years, to target a very, very small minority of people, and actually purporting for this to be about safety and protecting women. And as someone who works in violence against women and girls every day, and who does grassroots work working with survivors, I can tell you that the threat to women is not trans women and never has been. The threat to women is men. And if they had diverted some of this effort and attention towards violence and towards the inequalities and what young girls are experiencing in schools, if they had actually dedicated their time and effort, I think about how further forward we might be. But actually what they've done is set back women 5-10 years, and they have hijacked the feminist movement over the last 10 years to where you can't do anything without someone turning up and demanding what a woman is. You can't march for equal pay or march for abortion rights without someone coming and trying to hijack these efforts. And they have fractured the feminist movement to where we're finding it so hard to make progress and finding it so hard to speak about the things that actually are issues for women, because the narrative has been entirely dominated by them in the name of protecting women. But it's just about bigotry. And I think narrowing the definition, reducing what women are to simply our reproductive capacity. You want to look at why women's rights are being rolled back across the world and why our reproductive rights are being taken away. It is because they have spun this narrative about biological sex and reproductive capacity being the things that define a woman. And misogynists have taken that narrative and run with it. And now it's harming all of us.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't want you and Jane to get in a rammy, but you both would describe yourself as feminist. Jane, just answer yes or no. Would you describe yourself as a feminist?
Yes.
Yes. And Alice, you would absolutely describe yourself as a feminist. Your
Absolutely.
view is that the Supreme Court ruling and therefore people who support it are setting back the case of feminism. It's so interesting that the two of you are on here saying that you are feminist, but Alice, you would describe the position taken by Jane as one of bigotry.
I think it is, unfortunately. I think they are forgetting what the real issue is. Men have never had to disguise themselves as women to commit acts of violence. They do that just fine on their own. And I think that I really wish that the effort that has gone into this over the last 10 years had actually gone into something more valuable. But that's time we can't get back, unfortunately. And now it's up to, unfortunately, people who work within the space and people who are working violence against women to try and undo some of the damage and unpick some of some of what's been done and try and get back to the real work and the real focus.
Well, Jane, have you been barking up the wrong tree?
No, absolutely not. And I reject utterly the allegations from Alice that I am a bigot, and that myself and the many thousands of women like me who've been campaigning for years and decades, and certainly in my case, and in the case of many of the other women that I work alongside, campaigning and being involved in different aspects of the women's movement for many years and decades, campaigning for abortion rights, and campaigning for women's rights to single-sex, female-only services, support and care when they have been the victims of abuse, violence and sexual assault by men. Alice says that the threat to women is men. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Predominantly the threat to women and men. The difference between Alice and myself in terms of developing that argument is that I have an understanding that men who call themselves women are still men. They have not become women. So if we understand that men...
I think you're right. Alice, would you accept that is the fault line? That Alice, when you're talking about a trans woman, well, you probably wouldn't talk about trans women. You would be absolutely accepting of someone who was biologically born male, but who transitions to being a woman, becomes a woman in the fullest sense. Yeah.
If you transition, from a man to a woman, and you become a woman.
Right.
No.
Right, so there's the fault line between you. I think clearly,
the issue is that painting trans women as predators, as people who are sexually violent, who are only transitioning to commit acts of violence towards women, is a fallacy. And
well, there are always rogue actors, Alice. There are always rogue actors. And when you look at our law is about protecting people from rogue actors. Most of us drive at the speed limit. Most of us don't steal, our neighbour's wallet. Most of us don't punch each other in the face. But the fact is, the law is there when there are rogue actors. And we have seen rogue actors. We've seen it in Scotland. We obviously saw the case of Isla Bryson, the convicted double rapist who transitioned to be a woman during the court proceedings, during the legal proceedings. A pretty clear example of a rogue actor. Is that not what the law is there to protect us against?
I truly accept that. However, someone is not a rogue actor or sexually violent because they are trans or because they are anything else.
No, but it can be used. I mean, if you are going to be completely accepting of everyone who says that they are trans, it can be used.
This women commit acts of sexual violence. Why is it that as in sex spaces you're going to be free from sexual violence just because there's no trans women there?
Well, I mean, you'll know the figures as well as I do. You know that
any guarantee.
What 1 in 4 women at the moment would have been the victim of some kind of sexual assault or sexual violence. The vast majority of that is perpetrated by males. I mean, you know the stats as well as I do. But
the point is that legislating against a whole group because you say there could be a rogue actor, it's unfair and it is bigoted, unfortunately. And I think saying, well, a trans woman could go into a space and assault someone, yes, but that's not because she's trans, and also that there's no guarantee in any space of safety. And I think that it's just so frustrating to go through these arguments again and again and again. And I want to go back to the points that were being made earlier, which is this actually harms all women. Having to provide proof that you're not trans, having to provide proof that you're cis. I don't carry around a gender marker certificate with me. It really is going to harm all women. And
yeah. Well, I mean, we do have to wait and see, you know, what kind of guidance is given and how this will actually translate into policy. Alice, just before I'll let you go, because I say we're busy, but this is something that's just been put to me, and you know, from your position, how do you feel about some of the protests that we have seen? People protesting against the Supreme Court ruling, and we have seen placards like "Punch a turf," "Kill a turf," you know, very threatening kind of behaviour towards, I guess, the position that Jane has. Is that something that you would endorse?
Well, I would not endorse killing or punching people at all, but I think that protests are an important and vital part of our society, as is free speech. And I support anybody who wants to exercise their right to speak about this issue, whichever way they choose.
Whichever way they choose?
Whichever way they choose.
OK. Punch a turf, kill a turf, hang a turf?
Well, I'm not going to use that language, but I understand that people have. And I don't endorse that language, but...
Isn't it violence against women? Or the threat of violence against women?
I think we're getting into a little bit of a straw man argument that I'm not going to engage
Okay, fair enough. That's fine. Honestly, I'm grateful for your time. And Jane, you too. 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. You can text us on 80295.